Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final of the Chessable Masters. And in this video, I'm going to present you game 1 of the final match between Magnus Carlsen, world's #1, as he's playing against Alireza Firouzja. It's an incredible game, and probably it's one of the best games ever played online. I'm not exaggerating. We get to see a high-level performance by two of the best players in the world with a lot of instructive, practical ideas and beautiful tactics. Stay tuned, watch the entire video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for doing that. I will show you what happened. Magnus is playing with the white pieces and he starts the game with the move 1g3. Very flexible move, and the game can go still into many different directions. Let's see what happens in the game. Firouzja goes for d5, and after knight f3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, d4, knight f6, we have a symmetrical position. But don't worry, the game will soon explode. c4, c6, very solid reply, so that if you're ever going to take on d5, black is ready to take back with the pawn and maintain the symmetry in the position. Castling kingside by both sides. And here Magnus goes for an interesting move. The main continuation is here to take on d5, but Magnus decides to play this sharp move, knight c3. So here, of course, black is no longer able to maintain the symmetry. He cannot develop the knight to c6, obviously, so he takes the pawn on c4. This is the sharpest move in the position. Here, white cannot regain the pawn immediately and therefore decides to occupy the center with its two pawns on e4 and d4. Black played here the move b5, protecting the pawn on c4. White played the move queen e2, and black advances the pawns on the queen side. Very ambitious play, but this is modern opening theory. White goes for the move rook d1, so the rook is opposing the queen on the d file, and after the move knight bd7, Magnus played the move d5. This is a very nice idea, with the threat, of course, to take on c6 and open up the file for the rook. Black captured the pawn on d5, so now he's two pawns up. White has the possibility of taking the pawn back, but even stronger here is to advance the pawn to e5. Very sharp idea to attack the knight on f6. If the knight goes away, let's say it goes back to e8, or instead the knight goes to e4, for instance, White's idea is to take the pawn on d5. And in both cases, White is very active with a lot of tactical ideas. Black is having serious problems in that case. So black needs to come up with an alternative solution for the problem with the knight. And look what Firouzja played here. He went for the move b4, counter-attacking the knight on c3. But after pawn takes f6, obviously there's no time to take on c3 because white is planning to take the bishop on g7. And therefore first black needs to take back on f6. And this is very interesting because with the knight recapturing on f6, black supports the pawn on d5. Now black is about to take the knight on c3 and Magnus goes with its knight to b5. Let's just take a small moment to figure out what is happening, because black is having 3 pawns for the piece. So the pawns are potentially very strong, but at this point white is still having control over the center. Black played the move bishop d7 to attack the knight on b5, and Magnus played here the move a4, supporting the knight on b5 with its pawn. Bishop takes knight, white recaptures, and now you see that the queen would love to attack the pawn on b5 with the move queen b6, but then the pawn on e7 is hanging. So therefore black starts here with the move e6. Look at this beautiful pawn formation. It's not something you get to see every day, but white goes here for the move knight d4. So the knight protects the pawn. In certain cases the knight can even come to c6, and also it does open the diagonal for the bishop on g2. Very complicated position, but up to this point the players have been following an earlier game of Magnus Carlsen, which he played in 2022 against Shahriar Mammadiyarov. In that game black played here the move rook e8, which was not the best move, and Magnus eventually went on to win a nice game. Here Firouzja, definitely familiar with that game, decides here on an improvement as he decides to play the move a4. So the pawns are coming forward. It's also a risky move because white goes here for the move knight c6, attacking the queen on d8 and of course also the pawn on b4. Now the problem for black is you cannot move the queen to d6 to protect the pawn as it runs into the move queen takes c4. Beautiful queen sacrifice, making use of the pin on the d file. D takes c4, rook takes d6 is just really good for white because this pawn is much more dangerous than black's free pawns on the fourth rank. So instead of queen d6, Firouzja played here the move queen to b6. Now white gets the opportunity to eliminate that annoying pawn on b4 and black captures on b5. Hits the knight on b4 and white protects that knight with the move bishop d2. The rooks are connected and still black's pawns are nicely blockaded here. So after the move knight d7, opening up the diagonal for the bishop hitting the pawn on b2, the bishop comes to c3. White really wants to exchange these bishops. After something like bishop takes c3 and pawn recaptures, the knight is very stable and the pawn also covers the d4 square. White is in really good shape. So black is not really inclined in taking on c3, but instead decides to put a knight on c5. And what is white exactly going to do? There are no open files. It seems like it's difficult to generate some piece activity here. But Magnus started with a very important resource. He goes for the move h4 and he wants to launch his h-pawn to open up the black's king's position. Knight goes to b3 to attack the rook in the corner, but first it's bishop takes bishop. Black recaptures, of course, and now the queen comes to e5 with check. And what should you do here? Well, if you try to play it safe by going back with the king to g8, which was not played in the game, I will show you what Magnus's idea is, because he wanted to follow up here with h5. Sacrificing the rook. If you take the rook on a1, then the pawn comes to h6. This is modern chess, threatening queen g7 with checkmate. If you close that diagonal, it's queen takes pawn. And if you go king h8, then it's queen e7, and there's nothing you can do against the mating threat on g7. So very impressive play, but it didn't happen in the game. You understand now why Firouzja instead decided to play here the move f6 to attack the queen. Queen takes e6, and now both the rook on a1 and the knight on b4 are hanging. There are two options. In the game, Firouzja decided to take the knight, but of course we should study also the consequences of knight takes rook. In that case, I think knight takes d5 is the best move, with the idea that the knight is no longer hanging. There's this plan of giving a knight fork on c7, attacking the rook and the queen. Also the knight on a1 is still hanging, and things are probably okay for white. It's a very complicated position. But let's see what happened in the game. Queen takes knight was played, and now white decided here to take with the rook on d5, and still the rook on a1 can be taken, which was here again not played by Firouzja. If he takes on a1, it's rook d7 with check, and the king is in trouble. If the king goes back, then you can even take on a8, and well, it's clear that white's king is much safer. The major pieces are dominating the center. If you do take back on a8, it's queen takes f6, king g8, and checkmate on g7. Just a sample illustration of how quickly things can go wrong, because white is super active with this queen and rook. So you see, rook d7 is a serious threat, therefore Firouzja plays it safe. He places the rook on the 7th rank, guarding a potential check. Now white has time to save the rook. It goes to d1, so white is renewing the idea of coming with the rook to d7. Black played the move rook e7, attacking the queen. The rook goes to d7, no need to move the queen away. The rook on e7 is pinned. Black played rook f to f7, so threatening to take the queen. Rook takes e7, rook takes e7. And now the other rook comes to d7, again pinning the rook. So black has to take. And now it's queen takes d7 with check. Where's the king going? Well, if you go king h8 into the corner, there's queen f7, bishop bishop d5 is going to be played soon with mating threats, and white is winning here. So that's not a good move. The king should therefore go to h6. And even here the position is razor sharp because the bishop now comes into d5. Note that black is a pawn up, but there are some ideas for white here in this position. First, black gives a check on e1. The king goes to g2. The bishop is still guarding its own king. Now knight d2 was played, which is a super move by Firouzja, because white really wanted here to play bishop g8, threatening to take on h7 with checkmate, but it allows the move queen f1, and after king h2 it's knight f3 with checkmate, beautiful mating pattern with queen and knight, and you see that the bishop on d5 is no longer there to eliminate the knight from f3. So bishop g8 is not possible, and anyway queen f1 check, and then after king h2 intending to win the pawn on f2 is a huge threat. So queen a7 is the only move to keep the pawn under control. Now giving a check on f1, king h2 doesn't lead anywhere. White is still in control. The bishop is dominating the knight on 2 squares distance, so there are no ways for black to make progress. Well, queen f1 was not played in the game. Firouzja went here for the move queen to e5, attacking the bishop on d5. Now, something like bishop g8 runs into queen e4, and this is very annoying. There will follow a lot of checks, and black is absolutely okay. So Magnus instead played here the move queen to c5, and you gotta watch out. Queen f8 is a serious threat when the king is in serious danger. So therefore king to g7 was played. Now you may go back and try to initiate a repetition, but Magnus is even playing here for a win. Goes for the move queen a5, attacking the knight on d2. And the knight is in trouble, and note that the pawn on b2 cannot really be taken. You're protecting the knight, but it runs into queen a7 with check, king h6, and then it's bishop g8, and black cannot defend against the mating threat on h7, and you see that the queen and knight are too far away, unable to attack the white king. So Firouzja also playing very sharp here, as he went here for a beautiful, stunning idea. He played the move a3. He is trying to create a passed pawn, and the pawn wants just to promote as soon as possible. There's no good way to take on d2 because the pawn will get further, and it's just winning for black. So what should white do? You cannot take on a3, then the bishop is just hanging. So white decided to take the pawn on a3, but now the c pawn is a passer. c3 played, and it's only 2 squares away from becoming a new queen. Queen a7, check. King h6. And here again, there are a lot of complicated lines here, and don't forget it's a short time control. It's not easy to work out all the consequences. Still, bishop g8 runs into queen e4 check. And well, at some point, let's say after king g1, the king can even come in to h5. If you take on h7, then you have the winning king walk, king g4. Everything is protected. If you go queen d7, then you play f5. The king is safe. King h3 is a threat to deliver checkmate on g2. And apart from that, there are always plans just to run with the pawn. Let's go back. Bishop g8 is not possible. White should maintain that bishop on d5. Played here the move queen c5. Queen defends the bishop, keeps an eye on the c pawn, but black played here the move c2 anyway, allowing queen f8 check. King h5, it's the only move, and now the critical moment of the game, as here there's only one move for white to stay in the game, and it was not played in time trouble by Magnus. He could play the move g4, which is incredibly strong. It's a forcing move with the point that if you take on h4, it's queen h6 check. If you take on g4, then you can take the knight, your piece up. And in order to win the piece back, you can take on d5 with check, deflecting the queen from d2. Queen takes d5, c1 queen. And this queen endgame should probably be a draw, but it's still very complicated. g4 is a really good move. Another important nuance here is that after g4, king takes g4, you can give a check with your queen on b4. And when the king is going to f5, then you just take on d2. And here, similar deflection idea. c1 queen, queen takes c1, queen takes d5. And once again, the queen endgame should probably end in a draw. But look what Magnus did in the game. He is still playing for a win. Went here for the move, queen f7, defending the bishop. And of course, there is no time here for black to promote the pawn, because it runs into queen takes h7. Black is a queen up, but after queen takes h7, king g4, queen takes g6, it's going to be checkmate. Bishop e6, there's no need to take the queen yet, only after bishop e6 and f5. Now you take the queen on g5. This would have been winning, but of course, Firouzja is not falling for it. He is not going to promote the pawn. If you do play king h6 to keep the pawn defended, well, it's queen f8 and you get a repetition anyway. But the key move here for black is to play the move h6. And it looks incredibly scary to have that king on h5, but now it's the knight on d2, which prevents the bishop from coming to f3. Remember earlier, that bishop was taking away that square from the knight. Now the knight is preventing the bishop to deliver checkmate on f3. Well, what can what can white do here still? Well, if you move the queen somewhere, then this was played in the game actually, queen d7, then it's c1 queen and there's no good check. So that's just winning. And if you play a move like queen b7, which is tricky because now the queen and bishop are working together. There's no time to promote the pawn because of bishop f3, knight takes f3, queen takes f3 with checkmate. But it's very simple chess sometimes. You understand what the threat is? You gotta deal with it. Prophylaxis, queen e2 is the killer blow here. And you're covering the f3 square. This is technically winning. Anyway, this was all not played. Even the move g4, it's not gonna work because of king takes h4 and there's no good follow-up. Queen takes g6, for instance. There's not a serious threat. There's queen takes d5 and black is winning the game. As I said, queen d7 was played in the game, but being low on time, Magnus resigned here anyway. As I said, after queen d7, it's time to promote to a new queen. There are no threats. g4, king takes h4. That's the end of the story. And with this victory, because Firouzja played just a simply amazing game, he scored an accuracy of 99.1%. That's just absolutely incredible. Not a single mistake. He just punished Magnus for that very late mistake at the end of the game, where he could have saved the game with the move g4, but instead he played the move queen to f7 and just lost one move later. I really appreciate this high-level performance by both players. I thought this was fantastic, high-level quality chess. Let me know in the comments, please. What do you think of this game? Any of your thoughts are more than welcome. And of course, much more coverage from these superstars in more videos to come soon.